Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Well, everybody wants to know what's in the skies these days. And well, according to the media, that's a thing that they now talk about with great gusto, with great excitement, with great interest. 60 Minutes is talking about UFOs, UAPs. We've got Tucker Carlson on his show on Fox News was covering it for years recently. We also have had different whistleblowers coming out alongside. That's what's been generating this more respectable approach to covering these topics. It's no longer, it used to be in the 90s, it was the domain of National Enquirer and hard copy. And it was always kind of a fringe topic that, respectable news outlets would never go anywhere close to touching or legitimizing in any way but laughter and derision. But now it's becoming something where everybody's supposed to be on cue talking about it with great serious concern. And it runs the gamut, and it comes to ideological support on DC for interest in this topic, from Tim Burkett, the Republican, from was he from Tennessee, yeah. And then we have people like Anna Paulina Luna, who was in the district, our home district for our previous home station we were on, WHBO. She is the congressional representative for that district in the Tampa St. Pete area. And she is a very conservative person. And she said that what she has seen from the whistleblower indicates that this is interdimensional beings, not extraterrestrial beings, are in these machines, these sightings. And then we also have folks like what's that guy's name? The minority leader,
Harry Reid.
Harry Reid, but the current one, Chuck Schumer. Oh no, yeah, he's the majority leader. Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer's talking about it and with great interest. So, yeah, we have Chuck Schumer, we have Harry Reid, we have a lot of whistleblowers coming out. We've interviewed some of the folks on this show in the past who have been, veterans sounding the alarm about this topic. We have a whole gamut of political representation on this subject, all saying that we now need to take the UAP topic serious. So to talk about this from a direction that will be quite fascinating, I have a guest today named Michael Grayman, who is the proprietor of Unmasking the Phenomenon. This is a Substack called unmaskthephenomenon.substack.com. How you doing, sir?
Good, David. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's good to finally be on the show. I've watched it for many years, so it's pretty cool to be here.
Yes, it's very great to have you on. So, Michael, tell me about how you got into this subject matter.
It's honestly quite a long story, I guess. We'll start with
where are you abducted? Let's start there.
No, I was not abducted, okay. But we could say I have had encounters. I think that's the buzzword people use these days. Well, we won't get into that right now. So my background is that of a historian. I did my undergraduate and graduate studies in history. Because I did not fit in with what you would consider to be mainstream academic accepted opinions. I decided that I should probably leave. And so when I left in 2017, 2018, um, I had an existential crisis, as many people do. Um, and that was about the same time that the UFO subject was kind of getting official steam. 2017 is when the New York Times article with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal came out. It's also the same amount of, it's the same time that the Netflix documentary about Bob Lazar came out, which was produced by Jeremy Corbell. And so I started looking at this subject mostly out of curiosity at the same time that I was kind of having my own, um, we'll call it terrible look into the nihilistic world, and just trying to figure out what the point of life was at the exact same time as, the government was supplying me at least some kind of answers about UFOs, or someone outside of the government was trying to show me what was behind the curtain, I guess.
What year was this?
2018, 2017.
Okay, that's right when they started doing it
Oh,
mainstream.
yeah. And so I thought it was interesting that I had my weird um, moment where you look down and the floor is gone, and you've found yourself in the abyss, and you're looking for something to hold on to. And at the same time, that's the very moment that the UFO UAP conversation became an officially accepted topic. Before that, UFOs were, the reserved for David Icke or other conspiracy shows. It's not something that polite company is going to discuss with you. And so it just kind of, it was surprising to me that it showed up at that time, but that's when it became an interest of mine. It was the same time that I was looking at existential philosophy. So I was reading a lot of Russian literature, I was reading Nietzsche. And then at the same time, I was, having been an outcast in academia and kind of looking at the general state of the Western civilization, I remember wondering to myself, what is going on? What is wrong here? And so I started exploring, ancient Western history and trying to understand what had happened in the West that led to this moment. And so I was exploring Christianity, UFOs, and existential philosophy all at once.
That's a heck of a mix there. So, you said you saw the abyss. Are you talking poetically or are you
Yes.
talking literal?
Poetically.
Okay. But then you said that you were interested in this topic purely on a academic kind of level. You weren't interested in it as a phenomenon that you were curious about.
I think UFOs was something I was interested in, kind of coming from a more conspiratorial minded background.
Okay.
I was interested in 9/11 conspiracies. I was interested in things like that. And so it was kind of like a side project, just, curiosity thing for me. I remember watching like Ancient Aliens when I was in high school, and then just kind of discarding most of that information in college because as a historian, what other historians do is they laugh at the History Channel. They make fun of the fact that they put Ancient Aliens and Pawn Stars on the TV show. So you just don't really take that stuff seriously. But I definitely didn't care about UFOs before it started becoming, an official topic of discussion.
So you never thought about it much at all until you saw it being pushed into the mainstream media, huh?
It was like something I saw and knew about. Everyone knows about Area 51 and UFOs, and everyone had seen War of the Worlds and, pick whatever UFO alien movie you want. I had watched those things, but it never was something that I was thinking about as a libertarian.
So you kind of missed the '90s then because you didn't see all that. It was a little bit more interesting, more topical from a pop cultural phenomenon back then.
I think I was too young to really pay attention to it. I was more interested in Nintendo video games. I didn't care too much about what was going on as far as UFO movies and UFO discussions.
Yeah. Did you see the movie Independence Day?
To this day, I have never seen Independence Day. I only saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind, maybe 4 years ago.
I'll have to tell you, if you're interested in academic studies about this phenomenon, you've come to the right show. I am the actual founder of the discipline known as critical grayness studies, where we examine institutional gray privilege that's built into our society, because the folks in UFOs, whatever kind of advantages they have, it's certainly a kind of privilege way beyond anything that you or I enjoy. That's for sure.
Right.
But and I do think if the Pentagon has this war going on. Well, they've got a war going on about everything, but they have a war, internally in Pentagon and other, um, you know, uh, departments that are completely off the books and everything, where they're talking about this matter. And some people want it disclosed, some people don't, some people want this or that. But I think if the Pentagon's going to embrace critical theory when it comes to gender deconstruction, they better apply critical theory to the privilege that the folks in UFOs enjoy, because I mean, we're all living in poverty. We can't even get in America, our supply chain to work efficiently. We can't get people to have, quality long life expectancy anymore. People are riddled with illness, and yet they're palling around with whatever these things are. If they are machines that they're using, that's certainly something that everybody should be able to enjoy, including those who are in poverty. So I think that should be a top priority. If it's like, if the Pentagon wants to take this topic seriously, they need to run it through the same lens that they run everything else through, which is their critical, social construction theory. Their kind of postmodern embrace of microwave Foucault.
And that's certainly the perspective of people like Bob Lazar and David Grusch, and just kind of, I mean, I feel like almost everyone who's on the pro side of the official disclosure movement sees this thing as this technological capability that's being withheld from the public,
right?
That could, save the world. That was Bob Lazar's biggest thing, is he was saying it was a shame what they were doing to science, because, here we have allegedly this government that has this technology, this new ability of propulsion that could drastically change the way clean energy works in the entire world. It could save humanity, and it's hidden behind closed doors in the Nevada desert. What is going on?
Right.
But the problem with this, well, one, you have to get into the whole conversation of, is the UFO phenomenon a technological phenomenon? Most people, I think almost everyone, would say yes. I'm not entirely sure that that's true. But it just kind of brings the question as to who, why do we assume these things are technological? Who actually has access to it? And as I remind people all the time, everything we think we know about the UFO phenomenon and what is hid behind closed doors is leaked from the government by other people within the government. So it's a conundrum as far as what you're willing to believe and accept, and it's not obvious what actually is going on. And when you get into that,
it's so confusing. It's like a house of mirrors when you look into this.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's disinfo versus disinfo versus disinfo versus disinfo. And to me, the theory that it's just some kind of government hoax to get more money for the Pentagon. I mean, are you kidding me? We have a population. You don't have to go to that level of elaborate disinfo versus disinfo versus disinfo, house of mirrors, to convince the public to let them be robbed blind. They will do it gladly every single day for no reason, obviously, right? Yeah. I mean, they're still waiting for 2024 to save them as a presidential election when it's not going to do anything to help them. Well, you want to learn how to become a master of madness and con artistry. Go look at talk radio. I was listening to that, unfortunately, the other day, listening to the general talk radio vibe of what's going out there and the stuff they're selling people. It's like they've never, it's just constant con artistry. Con artists. Oh, we're going to figure it out. If you go on this cruise with me, we're going to figure out how to beat the loony left. We're going to beat them once and for all once we go on this cruise together. And it's like, how long can people be fooled? Apparently, they're every freaking minute of their life, and they'll enjoy every minute of it, And so I guess all I'm saying is that you wouldn't have to come up with, for those who want to say it's just a hoax completely, I don't think you would need to come up with this level of incredulity to to hoax people into, you know, the Pentagon can literally print, the Fed could print $5 trillion right now in terms of computer money, put it in the Pentagon's hands, and the public wouldn't do a darn thing.
And they might have already done it in the time that we started this podcast.
Exactly.
Right.
So this idea that like, oh my goodness, they're doing this because they're trying to distract us. What do you think you would do if you weren't distracted by this topic? Nothing. What do they need to distract us for? I hate that. That's the dumbest argument. They're doing this to distract. They don't need to distract you. You've got plenty of stupid stuff that the public will gladly lap up, like the 2024 election or anything else.
You don't need to go to something as bizarre as UFOs to distract people. And the other thing is, it's not working. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, sure,
they're not into it. They don't like it because they think they're too smart for it. Oh, we got this one. It's funny how that is,
during the pandemic, they released all these articles about UFOs and whistleblowers, and nobody cared. I mean, I don't know. People consume media on rapid fire at this point, and they just kind of ignore and forget. But the Pentagon has no need to distract you with bizarre things like this. And the other thing is, and everyone wants to say, the UFOs, it's a psyop, it's a distraction. Yes, but at the same time, most of what you see and this is the reason I started Unmasking the Phenomenon, was I realized that no one is reading the UFO literature or the UFO cases. This is all information that's just kind of sitting there dusting. It's been dusting since the 1950s and 60s. And so I had already been reading it, and I was like, okay, well, I'll talk about this since nobody else knows. The UFO, and I still have people all the time. They're like, are UFOs real? I'm like, we've moved beyond that. We're not at the point where we're asking if the phenomenon is real or not. It's a matter of, is the interpretation of what it is correct? There are things happening. People are seeing things. It's not just the government that's talking about this.
Right.
In fact, when you look at the case studies, you have 60, 70 years of information that's mostly just collected data from the public of things that people have experienced and talked about, whether they talk to their newspapers or they talk to civilian researchers or they talk to military, personnel who are questioning people about this. There's an array of source material out there of just normal people who want to be left alone, that saw something strange in the sky. And that's what, for the majority of history, that's what the bulk of the UFO information has been. Sure, there's Area 51, there's Bob Lazar, there's the national security apparatus, and the determination to try to hide or supposedly hide the phenomenon from the public. But that's just one portion of it. So if the government starts to decide to acknowledge that there's something going on, they're not just acknowledging what they have hidden in hangars, they're acknowledging what people have been seeing for years and years and years. And now some of that information, or some of the things that people have seen, it could be Pentagon secret project, black budget craft, who knows? As Father Turbo said, if it's metallic nuts and bolts craft, you should probably assume it's the government. And if it's not, then, you're messing with something more akin to demons or spirits, I suppose. But yeah, the Pentagon has no need to lie to you to get you to give them money. They take your money anyway. They have no recourse about what they do with it. They'll send it to whatever country they want to. And so that's not why this has become they're not doing this for money. They don't need that. That's not the reason this is happening.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a dumb observation a dumb interpretation to say, well, they're just doing this to make money. Because you're right. These things have largely existed as people seeing them, and it's always a lot of them are, again, going back to the 90s, because I don't hear about them and I know they're out there still, but I remember in the 90s, they really pushed the whole, on the alternative media, the sensational stories. They would always have somebody in the country getting abducted. It was always a lady, you know what I mean? And
You're talking like the Coast to Coast with Art Bell
there's Coast
and
to Coast.
George Norrie and George Knapp and people like
Or
that.
there was like they would have these cheesy shows like Hard Copy and Extra, and they would say this lady says that the UFO came into her window. How many of these uh, stories though could be because of like the hoaxiness of some of these hypnosis based recollections, where it's like I
Right.
was having struggles and I was depressed, then I went to this weirdo who did this strange type of hypnotic recollection, and I started remembering that these little guys were grabbing me, and that's where a lot of these stories come from. So how much of that is reliable though? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I mean that's true. There's, I've got books sitting beside me right now that are full of case studies of hypnotic regression and these memories, supposed memories, um, of being abducted by aliens, and they don't. It's weird to me that there are some people out there that have these experiences and they remember every second of it, and then you have some who completely forget everything, and so you have to ask questions about why is a phenomenon letting people remember things versus some people forgetting things. um it's hard to really pinpoint what exactly is going on, and how much of this is just people who want attention. There's plenty of supposed UFO contactees who are just lying, um and so there's just a lot of information you have to sift through to figure out what's legit and what's not, and that's what ufologists have been saying for years. A lot of what they base their credible UFO witness accounts or abduction accounts are based on, basically they're based on a feeling of how you feel about whether or not this person seems to be telling the truth or whether or not they're lying. And like you said, a lot of it is based on hypnotic regression, and so that is a very strained gray area because, as any psychologist will tell you, there's a whole lot we don't understand about the mind. Obviously consciousness is something that it's truly the last frontier of of the world in a sense, because no one really knows what consciousness is, how it can be manipulated. Different religions have different ideas on what consciousness is and how it can be manipulated. So it's hard to discern what exactly is going on, who's telling the truth. And the problem is every time someone says, here's a hoax, here's an obvious fake story, they think that somehow just destroys the entire subject. Like you've got this one UFO contactee who told everyone he saw this crazy thing, and then on their deathbed they say it was a lie, and therefore the whole UFO phenomenon is a hoax. And you can't do that. There's just too much information. There's too many cases to do that.
Yeah. Um, so, so do you, so what evidence are you looking at that you think is credible to suggest that these are a real phenomenon? Let's start with that.
It's not even so much that
Because we can
it's
go a million different directions here if we chase after all these stories.
yeah, I mean UFOs really, if you read the books, the case studies that people have put together and read, it gets to be boring.
Yeah.
Just how many there are. It's just on and on and on
And
and
when you say
on.
that, are you talking about experiences with the craft objects or the people, the creatures?
It's both. There are people who have seen craft who, they looked up in the sky, they saw a circular object with lights all around it, and it zipped off before they even knew what it was. And then you have people who saw a craft and it landed, and they saw two beings pretending to be repairing the object, and then they took off and left. There are people who have supposedly seen beings who have taken them out of their beds at night, put them on the craft, and then returned them home, a couple hours later, and they woke up and weren't sure if it was a dream or not. There's a million, I mean, I don't know if there's a million is the right word, but there's thousands and thousands of strange, bizarre cases. And some of the people talking about it are very normal, credible people with credible professions. They're not, crazy Skid Row heroin addicts who are just trying to get on television.
Yeah.
They're people who by and large don't want to be famous. There are plenty of UFO contactees who have admitted that if they had known what was coming after they talked about their experiences, they would have never have talked about them. Travis Walton in particular is one that I'm thinking about, who has said numerous times that if he could go back in time and never tell anyone about his abduction experience, he would have never done it. But also at the same time, you have tons of people talking about um, abduction like experiences that are not claiming that they have anything to do with UFOs. You can talk to plenty of your friends and ask them, have any of you ever experienced sleep paralysis? Have you ever had, I guess you can call it bedtime visitations from, shadow figures in your room? And there are plenty of people who will tell you, yes, I've seen weird things in the weird state between dreaming and sleeping, and it freaks me out. But they won't associate that with the UFO phenomenon. And so what a lot of this new official discussion about UFOs is it's making people reevaluate other strange experiences like that. And so now you can get on Twitter and you can talk to a million people. And I mean, literally, this is where you get into the millions of people who are sitting there in the comment sections trying to tell you about their experiences, how they didn't know it was a UFO. Now they know it's a UFO and they want to talk about it. Go on any ufologist or official person talking about UFOs, whether it's George Knapp from Coast to Coast, or if it's Jeremy Corbell, or if it's Tim Burchett, I don't know how you say his name, or Representative Luna. Pick anyone, and the entire comments of their tweets will be, I met the Galactic Federation. Please talk to me. This will change everything. The people need to know this. It's just the most bizarre thing, and no one really knows how to handle it or what to deal with it. And it's driving people into the strangest places.
You're saying every time Burkett or Luna tweet about this, they get lots of comments saying, I met the Federation?
It's not always the Federation. Yeah. Sometimes it's just people who they consider themselves to be experiencers. Even when I wrote my first article, I had someone reach out to me and was talking about how they were an experiencer. They wanted me to read their memoir, which I'm interested in that stuff, so I have no problem with that. And I don't mind talking to people who are like, people who, there are plenty of people who think they're experiencers and people who are experiencers. Now, whether they were put on a UFO craft and taken to Zeta Reticuli to pick up moon rocks on some bizarre planet and meet a species of interdimensional extraterrestrial beings who send them back with a warning of how to contact Trump and how to save the world. There's plenty of that, but there's also plenty of normal people who have experienced things and have can come to completely different conclusions, or sometimes people think that this is a nefarious interaction. Some people walk away thinking they've met the gods, and they want to tell everyone about how we just need to clean up the earth and we can be accepted into this galactic federation. There's a never-ending cycle of just kind of bizarre stories and interpretations, and they do frequently pop up. It seems so now that they're always popping up on Twitter threads. They'll be under the comments of normal people. There's also groups of people who sit around and talk about the stuff. It's just kind of becoming, it's more prevalent. It's everywhere. It's harder and harder to ignore, even if you think it's a psyop, fine, but it's making people act a certain way.
Do you think that is, are most of these people who encounter these things, are they doing remote viewing, or are they just, what are you finding?
I see the remote viewing stuff. It's certainly discussed in tandem with the UFO phenomenon. But that's not usually when I see or people talking about their encounters. Most of the people who have encounters with UFOs either see them in the sky, the generic "I saw a UFO" and didn't know what it was, which plenty of those can be disproven. But a lot of it is people talking about being taken in the middle of the night, abduction, just kind of generic abduction.
So those stories are still happening. In terms of people's reportings, these are still things that are being reportedly happening currently.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I still see it all the time. It's kind of like my thing is I like to go on to these posts and see what other people are saying. But even now, I mean, like I just read this article about a UFO cult out of Crestone, Colorado, which a lot of people don't realize this, but Crestone, Colorado is like, I don't remember if it's in the top 5. It might even be the most reoccurring location in America for UFO sightings, or the world for that matter. And it's also ground zero for cattle and horse mutilations as far as the public knowing about it. But there's a cult that just their leader died during the pandemic, and this woman was obsessed with angels. She called them galactics. According to her, she, encountered a being in her room, and that's why she started her cult. And there's all of these stories. It's not like it's something that, it's not like Betty and Barney Hill got picked up in the 1950s or 60s. I don't remember when it was, and then everyone just quit talking about it again. It's all the time. I know several people in my personal life who are not even interested in the subject of UFOs, who have claimed to have had, encounters with things. It's the same way you can talk to anyone about ghosts. Be like, oh, do you have any good ghost stories? Do you know anyone that lives in a house that's haunted? And people will talk about these stories, and they're all kind of sort of the same thing. Um,
How is it the same thing as ghost stories?
it's not so much that, I mean, it's the same thing in the sense that the bizarreness of the situation is similar. The fact that these things just kind of pop up, I guess I would say the similarity is that the UFO experience of a contact of an abduction, there are beings who just appear in your room, which is more akin to, a ghost appearance. People talk about the UFOs being extraterrestrial craft, but how do these beings just kind of randomly appear in people's rooms, and how do their craft just magically disappear? There's a lot of bizarre overlap between these stories. There's a book called Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée, and he looks at the history of the UFO phenomenon and how it kind of maps out onto old, tales about leprechauns and fairies and vampires, and it's the same kind of story. The same things are kind of happening in all these different stories, whether it's ghost stories or it's, fairy culture in the medieval period. The same kind of bizarre interactions are happening and taking place. It's just kind of, we interpret them to be something different. The average UFO abductee understands their experience to be a UFO abduction because they have a plethora of scientific or sci-fi media to consume that allows them to view that experience from that lens. Whereas, if you try to talk to someone in the 1600s who had a bedroom encounter with a being, they wouldn't tell you it was a UFO or even an alien from another planet. They would tell you, a demon was sitting on their chest in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And whether or not they perceive it to be a ghost is, did it look human? Did it look like a translucent person as opposed to it, appearing to be some kind of gangly dark creature or whatever?
I remember hearing about a abduction type story in the 1700s where a guy described walking for a long walk by the lake or something. Have you ever heard of this one?
Maybe.
And
I've
then
read
he
a lot
goes,
of them.
and then he like goes into this little small man has this little contraption. He goes inside of it, and it's this really big room, and he's like staring at him with big eyes, and then he just starts praying to Christ, and as soon as he prays to Christ, he gets out of there or something.
Oh
Or
yeah,
something.
and
At
there's
first he
tons
says
of
like, I don't want to hear that filthy word. He keeps praying it, and then he gets out of there.
yeah, there's tons of sources like that. There's actually a research group. It's called the CE4 research group. Um, and one of the guys who started it was just a MUFON, a mutual UFO network um, investigator, and he compiled, tons and tons of stories about people who were having an abduction experience, and they, even if they didn't know why they started praying to God, they started praying to God or mentioning the name Jesus Christ, and then all of a sudden, whatever these beings are that came to get them either just kind of disappeared or fled. There's thousands of cases like that, and a lot of people have converted to Christianity because of their experiences with stuff like this. Justin Marler, who started Death to the World, the magazine, the Orthodox magazine. I was listening to an interview with him and someone else the other day, and he talked about how um, someone had an encounter with, well, they perceived it to be demonic entities after they started praying to God, and that's what made them disappear. And so there's tons and tons of strange, bizarre stories and phenomenon, which is, to the materialist atheist, none of this stuff makes any sense. Whereas now, we're having a conversation about it, which is why, I started the Unmasking the Phenomenon. Is it's no longer this strange, bizarre, um, made up wives' tale type phenomenon. It's not just people discussing the weird things they see at night. Now it's the government's talking about it. Everyone's talking about it.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think? Well, let's just go. Let's do a quick take run through. What's your take on Bob Lazar? I mean, the guy that said he was in the Area 51 and was this, he come out and wanted to disclose that he went on Rogan's show famously recently. There's been a movie about him a few years ago. What's your take on him?
So I don't know what to think about Bob Lazar. When I watched that documentary that you're referring to a couple of years ago, I remember thinking, wow, this is really strange. There's this guy who claims to have worked at Area 51. Technically, he was at S4, which is kind of an appendage of Area 51, who talked about working with UFO craft. And then he came out and started talking to the news about it. They threatened his life, tried to discredit him and say he never worked there. And then you have this guy who goes up and takes the case upon himself to try to explore the credibility of Bob Lazar. They go to Los Alamos. They find out that this guy has actually worked in some of these places. He's incredibly intelligent. He has a lot of he's well versed in contemporary science. Bob Lazar seems legit.
Yeah.
But I read an article the other day. It was written by Paul and Philip Collins, and they were just recently on they've been on Jay Dyer's show before. They were on the Church of Eternal Logos with David Patrick Harry, talking about how people forget about this, but Bob Lazar was actually taken to court because he was caught kind of helping a prostitute set up an operation in Las Vegas. And they were writing about how part of that case was that Bob Lazar was like filming and kind of blackmailing the people who were apparently soliciting this prostitute, which kind of goes back into this whole weird, strange conversation about Epstein and just kind of weird sexual blackmail that you see within the government, but also, how much of that is tied to the UFO phenomenon. And is someone like Bob Lazar actually a rogue whistleblower whose life is being threatened, or is he someone who is blackmailed into telling this story? It's hard to say. And, I don't want to sit here and pretend like I know whether Bob Lazar is a federal agent trying to trick us, or even act like Bob Lazar is legit and can be trusted, because there's just really no way of knowing. But it does raise a lot of alarms that there is this entire apparatus within the government who's been blackmailed by people like Jeffrey Epstein, and whether or not you can trust them. And like I remind people this all the time. When you look at the UFO phenomenon, you look at who's been discussing this subject and who's been supposedly trying to get this information to the public, but has been unsuccessful. It's been people like the Clintons and John Podesta and figures that have, they're known for being a part of this strange apparatus, blackmail apparatus of whether it's pedophile or sexual blackmail or whatever. It just, to me, it all just kind of screams of a conspiracy of sorts.
So so I don't understand. What are you suggesting they're doing here? The Clintons and Podestas. Yeah, I know the Podesta, John Podesta has worked with a few of these different. Isn't he part of the Academy for the Stars or whatever, the group that
he was working with the To the Stars Academy? He was also, I think he's worked with Clinton, Obama. He was like
he worked on the manager for Clinton in 2016.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton, exactly. And so I mean, that's kind of bizarre to me, but they've always, if you watch the Ancient Alien shows, and I like to watch it just because it's entertaining, but there are several episodes where they pretty much try to pitch the Clintons as these like Washington outsiders who are here to try to help people figure out what the deal is with the UFOs, because Bill Clinton's really interested in the subject and John Podesta is really interested in the subject, or Jimmy Carter. There's all these people who are very attuned to the
Yeah.
political structure in Washington that are, I would hardly call the Clintons outsiders, and yet they are pitched this way, and that it just kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth when you're trying to figure out who is legit and who's being blackmailed and who's actually working on your behalf in the
Right.
government. And I'm not implying that Tim Burkett or Representative Luna or
Right.
any of these people are like that or being blackmailed. I think that a lot of people are just kind of curious now. Um,
Well, I mean,
I
Lou
think I heard
Elizondo, he was the guy that blew up this stuff in 2018, the former director of ATIP, right?
right.
And I
He's
actually had an
kind of
interview. What's that?
you interviewed him.
I had an interview set up with him, but I had to
Oh,
cancel it myself, actually. So it wasn't like he ducked me. He was going to do it a few years ago, actually. But I did interview his friend Sean Cahill
okay.
from Sean Cahill, the
I
other
know
he
the
was
name.
former Navy Master at Arms who was on the ship that saw the Tic Tacs flying around,
Oh, right.
and they flew into the water, roiled the water, flew up into the sky. They went up into outer space, is what he described, something like that.
Yeah.
And he was working. He had that. They had a temporary show. Lou Elizondo and Sean Cahill were working together as like co-hosts of this show, where they went around the world trying to figure out the truth about the UFOs. But there
He's what,
does
the
seem to be
History
a
Channel
lot.
show?
I think, was it History or Discovery, whatever. It was like a new show that
They're
came out
basically the
with,
same at this point, but yeah.
yeah, same company, right? And it's that, but yeah, it had Sean Cahill and Lou Elizondo. There was a lot of money trying to push this. But what is going? So let's kind of cut to the chase here, so we kind of know where you're operating from, in terms of like, so they say that they're meeting this resistance, like Lou Elizondo, Sean Cahill, they're they're the rogue outsiders. Like you say, some of them are saying Clinton is part of this rogue outsider group. John
David
Podesta,
Grusch. Yeah.
yeah. Well, Grusch, is he in the same clique? I guess, right? So, and then you have, and then what's the other guy's name? Vanderbilt, or it's one of the Vanderbilts, right? That are, what's that guy's name? That's also involved with this. He's a wealthy, one of the prominent families, who's involved.
Rockefellers, maybe. I know the
Not,
Rockefellers were actually patronages of John Mack's work.
yeah, the
So
one
there,
I'm,
I mean, there's a lot of overlap as
yeah,
far as like the elite families in the United
yeah,
States and their kind of participation in this whole UFO phenomenon,
yeah.
the expected disclosure movement, and I've talked about this with people who are
Mellon, Christopher Mellon, that's the one I was
Christopher
thinking.
Mellon, yeah, and so I mean that's the other thing is how. All right, we'll cut to the chase with what I think is going on with all these people. There's something strange going on with all of these, these intelligence community members acting like they're somehow on the side of good and they want everyone in the public to know about what's going on. But there's a controlled narrative that's coming out of the Pentagon that's happening in front of Congress, and you can't necessarily tell if it's real or not. You know, I'm not so much of the opinion that I can trust. I'm not saying David Grusch knows that he's being used, or even that if he is being used. I don't know why everyone is so willing to accept what these people are telling them. You know,
Yeah,
especially you talk about like libertarian spheres, or you talk about even within ufology. UFO researchers have always viewed themselves as kind of like outcasts who are trying to break through the government screen and find out what is actually going on, and they're just gobbling up all this information that's coming from people who either worked for the government or still work for the government.
right.
And I don't know why that is. Well, I have theories about why people are believing this stuff, and it goes back to the, to me it's not surprising that this is all happening post pandemic, post COVID, because the pandemic made a bunch of normal people into conspiracy theorists, and I would say rightly so. But there's a ton of people who are now willing to hear and believe conspiracy theories without any kind of discernment of what is and is not real. And that's the perfect time to interject or inject something like the UFO disclosure movement into the public, because now there are tons of people who think that there's an entire apparatus within the government that can't be trusted, And so anyone that's working against, the unnamed cabal of people behind the scenes can be trusted. And that's why um, you have an array of interpretations of what's going on, but it seems like everyone is willing to believe what David Grusch has to say or what Jeremy Corbell releases
Yeah.
or any of this, which is bizarre to me because, and I've talked about this before, but like David Grusch didn't say anything that Bob Lazar didn't already say at all. It's
Right.
maybe a more official story, but I don't think he's released any, and everything he's talked about is not something he's seen firsthand. He just has knowledge of this
Yeah.
because he's interviewed people who are
Right.
higher up that supposedly have need to knows. And that's not enough for me to base any kind of opinion about whether or not this is real or, what they're telling you is real. Like I believe there is a phenomenon. I believe that people see it. I just don't think I believe whatever the general narrative coming out of the Pentagon or the people who are pretending to leave the Pentagon have to say.
And what about like their perspective that they're saying they can't get, like they were going to have a disclosure piece that Chuck Schumer was going to put in, and it failed because of this. They kind of pinned it on some Republicans in the House committee that was in charge of that topic.
Yeah, they point their fingers to people who are
Was it Mike Rogers? Was that the name, or something like? There was one of those.
It's someone from Ohio. They
Yeah.
always point to like, oh, so and so is the representative in the area of Wright-Patterson Air Force
Yeah,
Base, and
yeah,
that's why,
yeah.
of course, they would kill this bill. And
Yeah,
he-
and somebody took I mean, you can see it from a storyline. I'll take the fall. Don't worry about it. My primary is going to be just fine.
yeah,
And I'll take the fall. I'll be the bad boy. Y'all go out there and say, you really worked so hard on this. Go ahead. But is that the story for you that you take on that, or what? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, like to me, I'm really not interested in the contemporary disclosure movement beyond the fact that it's making people believe whatever the official narrative is. And like for me, it's surprising that I'm getting all these phone calls and text messages from people who do not care about this stuff at all. But they're not conspiratorial people. They're just kind of in general like, what is going on with UFOs? Why is Tucker Carlson? Tucker Carlson is the most watched, or he had the most
Tucker
watched
puts
TV
a lot of
show.
credibility on the topic when he covers it. Yeah. And he said that David Grusch, he said, I didn't know what to think about you. People have a lot of interpretations, but after I've done this interview with you, I have full faith in your credibility. So he really, he was really moved by the persuasion of David Grusch's interview.
Right. And so that's why this subject has become so weird, because it's not, I never in a million years thought that UFOs was going to be a subject that, my grandparents were going to ask me about over Easter dinner or Christmas dinner or something. So, but it's become that. And it's because people like Tucker Carlson have given it an array of credibility. It's because the New York Times is reporting about it. And because all these people are getting interested about it, and they have no way of discerning what is and isn't actually going on. And the average person is not sitting around reading books or reading articles or anything. They just kind of hear about what's going on, and then that's what they believe.
So based on your research, what is the phenomenon? What is the best smoking gun evidence you have that it's a real phenomenon, and what is it, and what people should take away from?
I don't have any smoking gun evidence that it's real. It's one of those things where it doesn't matter if I have any evidence that it's real. There's just enough people in the world that have supposedly seen it or encountered it, and they believe it's real. And all you have to do is look at them and how many there are, and see that it's real. To me, at the very end of the day, the government wants you to believe that it's real. And so that's enough for me to just kind of look at it, at least, like I said, it doesn't matter if you believe it's real or not. The government wants you to believe it's real. What were the other two questions? Sorry.
So what is it, in your opinion?
To me, whatever this is more akin to what you would call demons, because what I try to get across to my readers, and the whole point of my project, is that whatever this thing is, it's not a benevolent thing. It's ruining people's lives. It's taking them down very strange paths. It's getting them involved in all these weird occult practices. And it's something that should be you need to know what it is. Like, you need to know that it's not this um fake thing, but you also don't need to go chasing it. You don't need to go trying to fill the spiritual void in your existence with UFOs, as many people try to do, because the average American um doesn't really have anything to put their hat on as far as what the spiritual meaning of their life is. And so when you know you have a strange encounter in your bedroom at night with this being, and then the government tells you that UFOs are real, you're inclined to believe that whatever this thing is whatever the spiritual world is. And so people go on these strange goose chases looking for answers. And it's, as John Keel says, John Keel, the famous ufologist, he wrote a bunch of books in the 70s. He basically told his readers not to go looking after it, not to let your kids read about it. Don't let your kids go chasing after it, because it'll end up, terrorizing your psyche and driving you insane. And you can see there are a lot of UFO reporters who, got tapped into the subject in the 80s or whatever, and now they just look disheveled, and they're kind of crazy, and they kind of believe everything that people tell them. And it's just something that's best to be avoided. But it needs to be, like I said, it needs to be understood. Like, people need to know that what they're messing with is
Well,
not
how do
a
you know?
benevolent.
How do you not know that's just kind of superstitious, conventional wisdom about something that's bizarre on the margins of human perception? That's you're gonna people are gonna tend, if they see something that's outside of their human expectations of normality, the fear of the unknown is going to make them feel like, well, just don't touch it, don't look at it, don't think about it. They'll come get you at night, like a boogeyman. So what makes you think that this is credibly a malevolent phenomena?
I mean, there's no reason that anyone should listen to me or could listen to me if they want to go, if they have some being show up in their room and they tell them that they're the Messiah, and,
Yeah.
they're feeling pretty good. They started this cult and now they're selling products on Amazon, and everyone seems to be really into it, and everyone's talking about love. That's great. And why would they listen to me? And they're not going to listen to me. So it's whatever. But like I said, is if you look at what people are doing with this information, if you look at what their belief is leading them to do, it's not good. There's nothing good about joining a UFO cult and having a mass suicide event because you expect your soul to come. You expect your soul to be picked up by an array of galactic UFO ships or whatever, which is what Heaven's Gate did in the 1980s. Um, you shouldn't starve yourself to death and drink colloidal silver and proclaim your divinity to all of your followers and allow yourself to be killed by your own crazy asceticism because you're in contact with UFOs or you're in contact with galactics. Um, and there's plenty of stories like that, which is what I spend most of my time writing about. If you look at those stories, you should come to the conclusion that there's something nefarious going on. And then you have some people from the perspective are like, well, okay, well, my encounters with divine beings or with non-human intelligence, which is the new word that people use for these things, they're like, they're giving me scientific information. I'm creating all these new biomedical inventions that will help humanity. Therefore, I'm in contact with angels. And there's no way you can know what is and isn't a benevolent being. And just because something does something for you once that's good doesn't mean it's going to continue to do things that are good for you. If you're picked up and abducted by someone and they give you a candy bar and they drive you around the block a couple of times and they put you back at the house, and then they pick you up a week later and take you back to their house and kill you, it doesn't mean that they were benevolent just because they gave you a candy bar the first time. You need to be more cautious with what you're interacting with. And as Father Seraphim Rose, the Orthodox priest, said, there's just no way you can objectively understand whether what you're dealing with is good or bad. And just because something feels good doesn't mean it's actually good. So, um, at this point, I recommend that most people just stay away from it. At least don't encounter it. Don't go seeking it out.
Yeah, seeking it out as in, but not, you're researching it. That's kind of seeking it out, right? Or do you mean something different?
I mean, like I'm reading about it, but I'm not going out into the Las Vegas desert with Dr.
Yeah.
Stephen Greer and Demi Lovato and sitting around in a group full of new agers who are, saying mantras and trying to contact ethereal beings. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, he seems to be the one that's that very pro, they're very positive entities, you know what I mean? He
Right.
seems to be pushing that a lot. So
And
he kind of gives you the bad bad vibe by the way he looks at
if
the
you, if
screens, you
you,
know?
if you listen to Dr. Stephen Greer talk and you watch his documentaries and you watch him do his little weird cry thing when he talks about how this is upending his life or whatever, and you don't get the weirdest vibes about that guy, I don't, like, I don't know what to do for you because he rubs me the wrong way. I don't understand why anyone would necessarily trust him.
But
And
he's in
also,
opposition to the Lou Elizondo department, the camp, right? Because
yeah.
he's saying they're all friendly, and he says the abduction, the ones who were abducted are actually victims of a government psyop, right? That's actually government. They're the ones that are like using. I don't know what he says. It's a hallucination or a government,
Oh,
costumes or something, right?
yeah, these bizarre stories that they've been circulating around in the UFO world for a while. There's a supposed intelligence officer who's been kind of leaking false information to the public or to UFO researchers for years and years, named Richard Doty, who has claimed that the Pentagon is basically paying these disfigured, little people to go into people's houses and at night and pretend that they're abducting them to make people believe um, that the UFO phenomenon is malevolent, so that
Yeah,
they won't accept the true secrets of the real,
yeah,
ET people that really want to make contact with you. You know, Stephen Greer is very much of the opinion that whatever this thing is, whatever the phenomenon is, it's benevolent, but it's being kept from us. Why he thinks, or why anyone believes it's being kept from us, is if these super powerful technical beings don't have the ability to just show up and talk to everyone they want to, and they're not being, kept behind a curtain because the government's evil or whatever, is bizarre to me. But that's the person who's, selling encounter programs, and you can download and buy his app, and you can learn how to contact aliens in your own backyard. And Demi Lovato is doing it, so why wouldn't you want to do it? Also, if you do go do it, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement about what you see and experience in the desert, and it's only he can tell the public about what they've encountered out there. And so there's tons of shady business going on in the UFO community. And
but he's in a different camp from the Lou
right,
Elizondo one, which is more ambiguous, but kind of suggesting that the aliens could be a threat, right?
right. And so he's accusing Lou Elizondo and the rest of the To the Stars Academy, and those kind of former intelligence community members of trying to convince the public that what they're dealing with is evil, so they won't contact it, and so that the government can continue to research it and build programs and collect money for their national defense programs and the deep state and all this. Um, it's all the same military industrial complex idea that this is what they're trying to keep protected from the public, and don't believe them. He also kind of discusses that the idea of Project Bluebeam, that the government's going to fake a UFO crisis, and
Yeah,
use the phenomenon to their advantage, which doesn't mean it's not necessarily true. Like, like I said, there's partial truths in every person's,
yeah,
every narrative that's coming out. Sure, Stephen Greer is right when he suggests the government is participating in psyops. That doesn't mean that the phenomenon is benevolent. And at the same time, you know, people like Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge are suggesting that there's a national security component to the phenomenon, and that these things might not actually be benevolent, and so people should be cautious. And that might be true, but that doesn't mean that they're interdimensional beings or extraterrestrials or whatever it is that they're pitching to the public. There's always partial truths that people have to dig through, and it takes a lot of time and reading, and a lot of it boils down to kind of like field work and talking to these people, which no one really has the time to do that.
Well, one incident that did get a lot of field work research was the aerial school phenomenon that took place in Zimbabwe at a school. You
Yeah.
remember that story?
Yeah.
Where the 90s, this whole playground of kids all saw these little creatures like come down, and they came in a little craft, and they like hovered up above the craft, and they had big black eyes, and they communicated to like dozens of kids images about the world was going to have disasters and ecological problems if we don't start taking care of this earth like Captain Planet told you to do.
Yeah.
What was that all about? Was that when you say they're malevolent, I just think to myself, what was the point of that? You know what I mean? If you it creates a folklore element, right? Because it becomes this sensational thing, and it's like, oh yeah, people from outer space came and told us we're messing up the earth. So I guess that helps Klaus Schwab down the road and all the stuff that they've been
Right.
building. But I guess that's helpful. But I mean, really, do you have to go to such ridiculous lengths to make that narrative? Like I said, I don't think they need any help.
Yeah.
I don't think the Schwabs and the Gores need that. Like, hey, let's hoax this because this will help sell a certain percentage of the population on going along with our global governance because of environmental fears. Like, I don't think you need that extra, because I think, I don't know, to me that just seems like jumping the shark, like this is too
Right.
much. If you're really going to make a case, you don't need to plant little fake hoaxes like that. So if it's not a hoax or something, and if it's not a delusion, mass delusion, these children seem to be sincere. They all seem reporting the similar thing. And they still stick to their story when they're adults now. They're all in their 30s and 40s or whatever. And and if we take your explanation that they're evil, malevolent spirits, well, what's the point of an evil, malevolent spirit hovering above a craft at a playground and sending images about the earth being destroyed in a way that seemed not like menacing? What was the point of that?
Right. I mean, so like, what do people do with those experiences? How many of those? So most of those kids, I think they were at a Christian school. How
Mm-hmm.
many of those kids have left their former faith and have started exploring new age ideas?
Uh-huh.
How many of those people are going along with, the Carl Schwab theories about
Yeah.
saving the world? It's all about what people are doing with their experiences, and the reality is that most of them are just kind of going down this strange rabbit hole of just kind of, well, one, they're starting to believe anything, but there is a lot of weird, whether it's vaccines or whether it's environmentalism, they all become proponents of these kind of strange ideas. Whitley Strieber did the same thing. He's the author of Communion, the really popular UFO abductee book from the 80s. Christopher Walken was in a movie about him, but he says the same things. They do this strange new age. They propose all these new age ideas about how to save humanity as if it's something that's available to them.
So it
I don't know.
seems it seems like there's like a conservative, this is very rough, not really, but like there's a left and there's a conservative UFOlogy kind of take. The left one is like the aliens are really benevolent and they're trying to save us, and we are just so backwards and Luddite, and we want to blow up anything that looks at us that's different. And then
Right.
that's like the Stephen Greer world and all these little, hey, they're just trying to tell us to save the planet thing, and then eat roach milk. What could go wrong with that? And then you have the other side that's like, no, well, these things are real, and the government needs to be honest about it, and they could be dangerous, they could be a threat, and we just need to be really taking this seriously because they're way beyond our technology, and they could really pose a problem if we don't take this seriously. That's like the Burkett, the Anna Paulina Luna, the Marco Rubio. They all kind of take that stance, right? And that's kind of what Lou Elizondo has kind of introduced, that angle. Do you think there's any? Do you have a theory as to what the point of that dynamic is? Just to random chaos, disinfo, to just confuse everybody, to make it feel like there's a legitimate threat. A legitimate power struggle for the truth here? Or I mean, you said you don't really look at the current stuff as much, but
it's hard to say what it is that's being projected to us. Why do they want us to believe that there's a power struggle? Is there actually a power struggle? um at the same time, I always wonder about like my own perspective. Like if I sit here and tell you that UFOs are demons, or that the phenomenon is demonic in nature, how many people are going to go, okay, demons are real, which means angels are real, and then the moment they have an encounter with some being that pretends to be benevolent, they'll just kind of believe what the benevolent being says. It's hard to say, and it's like I said, it's hard for people to discern what is and isn't true. And so like I said, the best thing to do is to just kind of keep your nose away from it. Don't participate in it, because you talked about like the dichotomy of these beings are benevolent and we should go hang out with Stephen Greer and Demi Lovato, versus this might be a national security threat and we should give money to the government and be cautious about this thing. The other flip side is, if people do believe these things are demonic, and then they start encouraging people to burn people at the stake who encounter them, that's equally problematic. So it's really hard to discern what it is that's going on, and what the proper way of looking at things is.
But you don't think that the entities themselves are benevolent. You take the position that they're malevolent because so many people lose their minds and stuff after spending a lot of time dwelling on the subject.
Yeah, and I don't know why you would assume they're the only reason anyone has ever given to suggest that these things are benevolent is because they come and they talk to school kids about saving the environment, or they work with scientists to ensure that their biomedical experiments are working, which we've seen how biomedical experiments
they do that. I haven't heard that story. Is that a common story?
There's a
tell me they were not at the Wuhan lab, for the love of all this.
So one of the big all right, there's a religious studies scholar, her name's Diana Walsh Pasulka, and I've spoken to her before. We talk from time to time, and her book American Cosmic as well as Encounters looks at people who believe to be having encounters with these beings, and her whole point of the book is it's not just crazy fringe new age people, or even schizophrenics for that matter. It's people who are successful scientists that are supposedly having contact with non-human intelligences, and she gives examples from the book. And one of those people in her original her first book American Cosmic is she talks about him under a pseudonym, has come out, and his name is Dr. Gary Nolan. He's a scientist at Stanford University.
Yeah,
he's like highly regarded. And when he's not talking about UFOs, he's talking about vaccines. And so, that to me is just kind of bizarre. And this is someone who claims to be in contact with non-human intelligence, despite wishing that was not the case. Like he's always tried to prove that, human innovation is coming from the humans, not their contact with non-human intelligence or whatever. And so there is this weird dynamic of people who are supposedly in contact with these beings, receiving technical scientific information, and what they're doing with it, who knows. After the pandemic, I'm less inclined to trust people like that and see that their scientific innovations with vaccines is somehow good for humanity. I don't see that, but there are probably plenty of people who do.
Yeah. I know that Lou Elizondo, I think, has spoken positively about John Brennan, which was a big red flag when I saw him say that,
Yeah. So. Like look at what NASA is. NASA was comprised of, thanks to Operation Paperclip, it's comprised of a bunch of former Nazis or current Nazis, who knows if they were still holding onto their Nazi ideologies when they were here. Yeah. But one of the most important rocket scientists that participated in the early NASA days was Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons, despite NASA's efforts to try to scrub him from the record, was a known Satanist who who viewed himself as the Antichrist, who used to hang out in the California deserts with Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, and do these sex magic rituals to try to conceive, spirit being babies. And that's the guy who built the United States rocket program in the 1940s. And so that's someone who believed that they were in contact with non-human intelligences. So why would you believe that anyone else that's in contact with non-human intelligences has the same malevolent or benevolent aims? I don't know why you would trust any of these people. But, Dr. Pasulka's work is really just trying to show human beings that there are people who believe this. What people take from her work and how they apply it to their lives and how they, choose to believe that these things are real and they want to contact them themselves. I don't know, but
then there's that millennial folklore about Jimmy Carter when he really wanted to know about aliens and they wouldn't let him see it.
Yeah.
He really wanted to know about aliens, and then he started weeping when they finally gave him the document that they were not what he thought they were, that they actually created his religion. That does seem to be very popular, like meme about the reason why the government is, because you hear that a lot with the UFO, believers. The reason why the government is holding this back is because they're afraid it's going to like make people lose their minds, and the world religions have so much power still. And so they're holding it back. Don't you dare tell those people, how much tithes we're going to lose. Don't you dare tell these people that, that this all stuff is fairy tales and it's all just aliens planted us. But
which is crazy.
What's that?
If you look at religions, if you look at what they do, most of them tend to adapt to what they find, whatever the current innovations are, whether it's philosophical or scientific. They don't discard those pieces of information. They find a way to make it fit the mold that they already have. You see that whether it's evolution or
heliocentric versus
heliocentric versus geocentric, or it has to do with gender construction, whatever. They will find a way to make the current thing, or whether it's liberalism or anything else, they'll find a way to make it fit into their religious mold. And that's when you kind of start to see splinters, is when those contemporary understandings of the world start to penetrate, something like Christianity, which is upholding revealed truths that are not meant to shift. What is revealed knowledge cannot be updated by scientific exploration. That defeats the whole purpose of what God reveals to you as divine and true. And that's why you get into these discussions about whether or not Darwinian evolution is real, or whether Adam and Eve are real. And you have Christians who go, it doesn't matter if Adam and Eve are real, God's still there, even if we were once microbes or whatever. And you get into these long-winded arguments about whether or not contemporary scientific or philosophical theories have anything to do with divine revelation. And what's interesting to me about the UFO phenomenon is because people no longer believe in God anymore, they're willing to accept this higher power that's supposedly constantly in our skies and showing up in our bedrooms. And since those are they're clearly a higher form of technological, if they're a race of beings and they have a higher understanding of the cosmos and they're able to traverse the cosmos in ways that we can't, they clearly are smarter than us. And so we'll just believe anything they tell us, whether that's, that nuclear weapons are bad, which I don't need aliens to tell me that nuclear weapons are bad, or that we're killing the environment, or that we should all get vaccinated, or what, that's
I tell you, there's something very romantic about when people wake up to the fact that their government is completely outside of any control of any sanity or morality or public accountability. There's something very romantic about, well, one can only hope there's a Hail Mary that out there that, the UFOs could shut down these nukes if they ever went nuts. You know what I mean? Because it's like, when you feel like there's no adults in control in the governmental sense, they're a bunch of psychopaths and blackmailed, losers and killers and idiots. all mixed together. Like the idea that that's running things, and no amount of elections, no amount of congressional passages of great bills or any of that's going to change that anytime. And you see how bloodthirsty they are to get us into all these really dangerous situations that could lead to nuclear annihilation. You better believe people are going to, I mean, entertain the thought, well, God, is there anything out there that could stop this? Like some little critter running by with a little device and shutting down that nuke before it blows us all up, So, I
Yeah.
mean, you
I
can see
mean,
it's a very compelling thing to think about. And that it is a desire. I don't think that's evil or I think that's just people longing for some kind of intervention that would stop psychopaths. And so if a psychopath is running down your neighborhood, it'd be nice to have somebody, you know, run him over before he stabs somebody else.
sure. I mean,
So
if you get in a car accident and you're mangled and you're dangling there from your car upside down, and someone comes and saves you from the car wreck before the car explodes, but then they take you back to their house and they do some Silence of the Lamb nonsense, and they throw you in a pit in their house and tell you to
yeah,
put the lotion on the skin. Should you trust that person, or are they a good person because they saved you from the car wreck?
yeah,
It's the same thing, like talk about the nuclear war phenomenon. If you know Joe Biden launches a nuclear bomb at Iran right now, and some UFO descends from the heavens and prevents its detonation, and then everyone starts to do exactly what that UFO race of beings or whatever tells us to do. Even if, let's just for the sake of theoretical discussion, and let's pretend that those things are actually demons, and then everyone starts doing exactly what those UFO race beings do or tell us to do. you know if they're still demonic, it doesn't mean that just because they did something good for you once, or they saved the world in that kind of way, that that's somehow a benevolent being that should be followed. And it's like,
yeah.
but that's the trick, you know what I mean? Like, that's the
But
whole, the fake miracles and the
so is it your impression that these are evil spirits who basically, because our culture is so anti-religious, and they needed to come up with a guise that would fit with the modern thing, so they dress up, so to speak, as, or appear, so to speak, as aliens, and they have little crafts, they're images of craft or whatever they're doing, that make people think that they're from another planet, so that they can sell the public on their credibility without invoking the spirit world. Is that what you think's going on here?
that's basically what I think is going on.
Yeah,
I think people are being convinced and hoodwinked into believing that whatever this is either somehow on this. Everyone wants to be on the side of the angels, and no one wants to be visited by demonic entities. Everyone wants to meet Saint Michael and Saint Gabriel. They don't want to meet, Beelzebul or whatever. But that's, humanity has no way of discerning what that actually is. Um, and that's like my main point. And there's no amount of, you know, goodwill and behavior that can convince anyone. Sure, if they want to prevent a nuclear explosion, that's not a
yeah.
bad thing. But you know,
Why do they show up with the traditional big head and the black eyes? Is that just based on what they saw humans imagining aliens to look like? So they just don a image representation that they think can sell their
who
credibility?
knows? And they don't always show up that way. You know what I mean? Like, there are plenty of cases of, you hear people like David Icke talk about reptilians, and you hear the people talk
Yeah,
about the Nordic race of tall, beautiful, blonde, ethereal space beings. There's all
yeah.
kinds of supposed races that are in contact with people.
And you think
Um,
every last one of them is just a devil?
my
Yeah,
advice would be the same advice
yeah,
that the church fathers gave for the last 2,000 years: is you have no way of figuring that out, and you're best off ignoring it. Because if God has some kind of message for you, he will get it to you one way or another. And also, why would, if these things are benevolent, then why are they showing up to you as these strange, tiny gray, big headed, dark, soulless, almond eyed
yeah,
creatures? Why are they never saying be not afraid? And why are they never proclaiming Christ when they show up? There's
yeah.
all of these people who think that this is there are plenty of people who see the UFO phenomenon as an affirmation of their Christian belief, but they think that they're dealing with angels. They've completely ignored the demonic aspect, or they just assume that because whatever they're interacting with makes them feel good, that it's
Yeah.
a angelic race of beings or an angelic spirit as opposed to something malevolent.
Do you think all of this government disclosure stuff in recent years is going somewhere? Like they're intending to make a big reveal and they're going to come out and say, "Hey, we created all the religions and we really want you to accept this new digital currency," or whatever.
I mean, it might. It's hard to say. It wouldn't surprise me if that's where it went. But at the same time, I think there's too many people who pick up on like I'm not the only person saying this stuff. I'm not the only person who sees the kind of shady business going on. And that to me is a sign that that's probably not what they're going to try to pass over everyone.
They're going to try something that we haven't thought of.
Yeah, I just think it's too easy. If you figure it out, if it smells like a psyop to you, and there's Tucker Carlson's talking about it, and there's millions and millions of views of people watching videos about how it's a psyop, then that's probably not the one they're going to use.
So what is the purpose then of them pushing this narrative?
I don't know. I think really they're trying to shift the public back into a new state of spiritual acceptance that there's something else in the world that's not just us. So you don't
think it's headed to any particular event. It's just a new normal, is like a new normal, right? Let's make this a new folk religion that people can embrace.
I mean, my general interpretation as someone who comes at this from a Christian perspective would say that the general direction we're headed with all this information is, one world government and the whole new world order concept.
Would that necessarily, in your opinion, imply that they're going to use like some type of crisis event, like an invasion or an encounter?
They could. I'm not going to say obviously that's what's going to happen, as some of the documentary makers like to posit to people. Like, Dr. Stephen Greer is 120% convinced that they're going to do Operation Bluebeam, and they're going to try to pretend that the spirits are malevolent, and they're going to use a fake UFO invasion to get the world to surround around a one world government. And they could still do that, but that doesn't mean Stephen Greer is right about the spiritual phenomenon being benevolent.
But here's what I don't understand about what you're saying. If this guy is a disinfo agent of some kind, why are they ruining some of their potential options? You know what I mean? Like you said, well, if people are smelling that it's a psyop a mile away before it comes their way, then it's not going to be a play that establishment forces would necessarily invoke. So why would they burn out all their options by having these different factions, like a Greer saying, well, they're going to try to do one world government and they're going to use aliens to do it? Well, that's, what's the point of like ruining all these different scenarios? Why doesn't he just play it smooth and just say they're all good, and you can have your personal relationship with these telekinetic things? Well, I mean, that to me seems like a more effective way of creating confusion and deception than blowing out a scenario early on. And then the other guys are blowing out other scenarios, like I mentioned, that, oh, they're going to come and say they're friendly, or, oh, they're going to come and say they're invading, or, oh, they're going to bring in a this or that. Well, why are you burning out all their options? There's not a few, they're going to make people. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if this is such a well-oiled machine campaign by the government to kind of prime the pump of something that's to come, why would that whole campaign involve, kind of basically wising up the population to be relatively skeptical of anything that happens? I mean, the ones of the population who think that aliens are benevolent, that are listening to Greer, are going to be very skeptical about any of the, alien encounters the government brings on, because they've been taught by him that those are the fake alien thing. And then the ones that say, no, they're real aliens and they're hostile, when they show up, they're not going to trust them either. So how is this helping selling the public?
I don't think they care if people agree with what's going on or not. I mean, I think that Discord works. Discord also sells. I think they prefer that people are at each other's throats over what this whole thing means, as opposed to having everyone believe that this is some kind of evil plan or some kind of attempt to hide benevolent beings from the public. I don't know.
Yeah.
To me, I don't think it matters whether you believe it or not, as long as we're arguing over something and missing whatever is actually happening. Then that's good enough for them.
And what's actually happening here? Are you talking about
I don't
something
know.
else outside of this topic, or are you talking about what they are?
Probably. I don't know. That's the thing, is I don't know. I'm not privy to that information, and I'm not
Yeah.
going to pretend I'm not going to Alex Jones you and tell you I have the
Yeah.
documents and I know what's going on,
Right.
because I have no
Right.
idea
For
what's
sure.
going on.
Yeah.
But I do know that they benefit from people being at each other's throats.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly the case. Our government specializes in figuring out very creative, elaborate ways to make people hate each other for no reason. It's amazing.
Right.
That is something that we can clearly see in front of us. So I want to just let you have any final concluding thoughts or takeaway points that you want our audience to consider from your perspective on this subject.
Nothing in particular I can think off the top of my head, other than that just be incredibly cautious about what is being told to you, what is considered authorized or unauthorized. Don't just assume that because someone supposedly got a video from the government that it wasn't, planted there for you to watch and start to believe these things. Caution is really the ultimate theme of unmasking the phenomenon, is that whatever we're dealing with, you are not in a position to discern whether this is good or bad. You can be fooled, and just to be skeptical, really, at the end of the day, is all I can recommend to people. Don't get so up in arms on one particular belief set. And even if you think you have an idea of what's going on, you need to remind yourself that you could be wrong. I have to tell myself that all the time. I'm like, what if my perspective on this phenomenon is a perspective that is, expected? Someone wants me to have this perspective, and that I need to, I could be just as harmful to other people, telling them to believe what I have to say is,
For sure.
it just be cautious.
And I always say, don't wait for the aliens to give us anti-gravity. We got to build it ourselves. So that mindset is something that nobody talks about, which is, people should be building things that are great, wonderful achievements to help alleviate the conditions that we find ourselves in. And I think that that's something that people should be optimistic and hopeful about what people can achieve in the right state of mind, rather than in delusions of one way or another, because there's a lot of delusions in this age that we're in, but that should not be a invitation for hiding or running away or being apathetic or paralyzed with indifference because you can't figure it out. So I agree with you that we should be skeptical of what's coming out, of course. And certainly if a little creature shows up in your window, I mean, that's not usually the way in which good things start, right?
Right.
Like you said, unless they're saying something. But I gotta tell you, I don't know, that whole thing you said about, well, if they're not proclaiming Christ, look, there's a lot of liars and killers who proclaim Christ. Let me tell you.
Certainly.
So they could even do that maybe, and it still may not be a good smell test. So
right. So you said that we should be developing anti-gravity on our own. I assume you're not a Ted Kaczynski, Jacques Ellul kind of guy.
I don't know why everybody likes him so much, but I mean, I know why, but I don't know why. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely have a skeptical attitude towards technology, in general.
Yeah.
It's obviously, I do think that, and like I said, people talk about Ted Kaczynski all the time. Most of his ideas, and he wrote about this, most of his ideas are not his own. He was not trying to be an original thinker. He had an original method for making sure people read his book.
Yeah.
But most of what he wrote were ideas that other philosophers had written about, but were not as gung ho about ensuring that people accepted them. I would say that Ted Kaczynski is kind of unique in that he actually thought that what he was going to do would make a difference, whereas I think Jacques Ellul believed that it didn't really matter and we were heading in that direction one way or another. But I do tend to believe that technology is something that, even if it at least appears to be benevolent or helpful for people in the beginning, it will be misused. Um, look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin was touted as this liberation currency to destroy the central banking system and free the average consumer and give them sound money. And the only thing that we've gotten out of this is, sure, Bitcoin's worth $40,000 right now, but it's um, cryptocurrencies is becoming the new norm for central governments and central banks, and you have people like BlackRock who are buying up the supply. And so if Bitcoin destroys the central bank but makes BlackRock the new central bank, does that really make it a good technology? Would we have been better off with just dealing with central banks and gold and paper money, or are we going to prefer that BlackRock is the new global central bank?
Yeah,
it's
well,
I do.
Yeah,
you go ahead. I do think about those things. I'm not entirely sure, if I'm full. I'm definitely not a Luddite, but I'm not sure if I don't really have a good argument against Ted. I have good arguments Ted Kaczynski's actions. I don't know if I have a good argument against Jacques Ellul with what technology does to humanity. And if good Christian people build anti-gravity devices and clean energy solutions, who knows how they will be abused by Klaus Schwab or BlackRock.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely there's a lot of bad people doing bad things with any tool that we come up with, and they certainly get misused. But I don't think that it's something that we have to run away from as a result of that and a kind of defeatist mindset. I would say that once, from a Christian standpoint, once you're redeemed by the new Adam, you're situated at the beginning of what your mandate was to begin with, which is dominion, right? And dominion is not escaping and hiding, but rather using the world as it is in a way that serves your fellow human being, in a way that helps glorify what God has created with his creation. So if that means healing someone from blindness, then that's something we're going to do. Now there is you've pointed out kind of like this bias that we have in our culture that's a kind of a fake techno kind of thing that I don't accept, where it's like anything new must be better than the old. That's dumb, right? But so is Ludditism or whatever. So I don't accept either of those options on the kind of dialectic of what we're supposed to choose from. But, everybody's always chasing the shiny new toy of whatever's new in terms of whatever the latest patented research is, where all the big money is. So that's an example in which, government coercion and control, whether it be the FDA monopoly or patents or any of these other type of intrusions using coercion and force, it kind of creates a distortion in which, we have to go after things that can be patented. That's not a market. That's not a market force driving people to spend billions of dollars chasing new patentable products. Patents are invention by government that says, oh, this is intellectual property, and we're going to create this kind of fictive concept of property rights in which the government's going to intrude into that space. And then it creates all these malincentives to look at drugs that were developed decades ago that are less toxic, completely way more affordable, don't require insurance or government to subsidize to make it affordable, and could be very, very effective for a lot of these diseases. But we're not able to see that because we don't have a free system of healthcare. We have a cartel system of healthcare, right? And it's corporate fascism. So, and the same thing goes for things like you mentioned, Christians will create anti-gravity, then Schwab will take it. I think that's kind of a plantation mindset, that if we, are on a plantation in the slavery times, and someone says, well, we could get out of here and just, we can end this violence that's what we're receiving. We just head straight past the tree line, keep running several miles, and we're going to be able to find the river and then go down there, and we'll be able to get to a place where we're safe. And the other people say, but no, but there's mosquitoes, there's yellow fever is running rampant. There's a plantation near that river. That guy's friends with our guy. He might see us, report us. If we get caught, we're going to get killed, and our kids will be tortured. Let's just stay here. So at some point, we have to learn to not live with that kind of internalized defeatism mindset. As in my opinion, I don't think Christians' goal is to escape this prison planet. I think it's to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, and
right.
that means
and you do that by participating with God, and then like it's kind of like the way the church describes itself. The church doesn't make cultures obsolete, it purifies them, right? That's kind of the way the church works. And so should Christians have invented the internet? I would say probably not. But do Christians have a call to go on the internet now that it exists and use it in a way that can help?
Should Christians have created air conditioning?
Right. I mean, so that that's, I mean, I don't know how you can misuse air conditioning.
There's a lot of ways you can misuse air conditioning.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying though. Like there's a call that once these things are here, you can go in, where Christians are called to be participants as the body of Christ, to work in those, like if Christians go to the internet.
I'm not saying you're saying this, but I don't accept the premise of once somebody invents it in sin, we can make something good out of it. I think it's the opposite. I think Christians should be leading the space of technological inventions and art. And then, they should do their best to make sure that they do those things in a sanctified and beautiful way, not in a way that is, sinful or, pathetic. And,
and maybe you're way of Christ. Maybe you're right. But for me, the reason I don't sit around and think too much about whether or not we're the ones actively developing anti-gravity or whatever is, in the end, the results will still be the same, right? We've been kind of given an endpoint in human history of what to expect. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't participate now, right? Like you're saying, like, why should we just give up technological innovations in favor of evil people? Why aren't we participating as well? I don't know, but at the same time, I'm not under the impression that inventions are going to save the world, right? And so,
well, inventions won't save the world, but Jesus is going to save the world. He's going to use his body on earth to do it. And the question is, what is he saving it for? Is he saving the planet Earth as a metaphor for just saving some souls? Or is it all kind of the same project, that you redeem the soul and redeem the body, and that God loves our body the way he made it? And every time we can heal somebody's eyesight, we actually are fulfilling our mandate of the dominion mandate of saying we're not going to allow nature to rob you, or our misuse of nature, which causes toxic foods like seed oils to cause things like issues with eyesight and later on that wouldn't necessarily be there if we were eating healthier. All these things fighting against evil actually do matter. And so, I don't want to go down too far with this, but you've raised some good points, and it's actually the heart of my show, or some of the questions you're raising here.
Yeah. So like what you're saying is, like, does our dominion as the new Adam, or I'm trying to think about the best way to frame this. Does the moment you're a baptized Christian or whatever, and you become a member of the body of Christ, does your dominion, your task that was given to Adam that he was unable to complete because of the fall, is dominion something that's been given to you to reclaim now, Christ, or is that something that's supposed to go after the second coming and the general resurrection? And I guess that's a good conversation, a good it's worth talking about. For me, I mean, like the gospel message to me is that the path towards, if we're called as Christians to participate as the body of Christ, what does the body of Christ do? It inverts what we thought we knew about how to save others. It inverts that entire story and makes it more about martyrdom than it does about, sure, Christ performs miracles, but his ultimate miracle was that he died and was resurrected. So I don't know, but it's a good point. You know, like I said, that's why I like to watch your show. I don't watch your show for UFOs. I just happen to be someone who's interested in UFOs and writes about it.
But think about what he does leading up to the cross. His whole life ministry is about healing relationships that are dysfunctional, healing brokenness, healing hierarchies that are mediated based on scapegoating. They were scapegoating the leper. They were scapegoating, the tax collector. They were scapegoating the woman, who was a prostitute, in a sense that, she's the reason why our community is falling apart, not their own internal sin. So yes, there's always a sin component to what Christ is healing, but wherever there's also relationship, and relationship is also tied in with the fall, and the fall is that which, the implications of that are that it corrupts our body, and we have health problems, blindness, and all these things. So I always like to ask people, like, do you think that Jesus, when he would heal people's eyesight, was doing it just as a metaphor for, like, you're spiritually blind, don't you see? Or is it both, or does he actually care about your eyesight just as much as he cares about you acting rightly? I think he cares about both. That's why he created us in the first place. He didn't create us as like these little clay objects that he was just going to teach a morality lesson to. There was actually something we were supposed to do all along. And when he resurrects, it's the kingdom of God is coming now and not yet complete. So it's already, but not yet complete. It's already begun, not yet completely fulfilled. And we're in the already, not yet kind of paradox, the balance of it's not fully happening. Everything's not fully fixed yet, but it has begun. And his resurrection is the first fruit of that restoration of the body and soul, not a spiritual resurrection, but a kind of a new body is also brought into picture, whose body is used to eat fish, so that is radically pro atoms. That's radically pro flesh and earth. When Jesus is eating fish after he's resurrected, that's completely a break from most religions, which want to detach away from the body. And actually, it's ironic. I think that a lot of the ufology stuff leads people to Gnosticism, in which they disrespect the body, they disrespect the importance of the physical world, and they disrespect the importance of this earth as something that God wants to use as his home. I mean, in Genesis talks about the Bible, Genesis talks about the earth being God's temple that he's going to dwell in. It's the same language used as the temple language being constructed. So this was meant to be his home. He likes us to have eyesight because he's a loving father who loves the way you look at things. He loves the way you see things. He loves the joy you get from seeing a flower. He loves the joy you get from hearing a beautiful song in and of itself, not because it's a metaphor that helps you see your wickedness. That's part of it, because that is a part of who you are, is that you're a relational being. And if your relations are plagued by sin, then you're missing out on the abundant life that God wants for you as a loving father. But he also delights in your being, and that's something that I think a lot of conservative reactionary Christianity, because they're so exhausted and fatigued by the world's corruption of the good, they have learned to hate the good itself because they think, well, there's so many corrupted forms of good that it's better to shrink away from the world in kind of a pietistic retreat.
Right.
And that will inform not only their view of technology, but also their view of a whole host of different things. Like you said earlier, the mindset you said is what many conservative Christians have, which is, well, what's it matter? We know what's going to happen. It's all going to go to hell at the end anyways. I don't think it does. I think if you read, I have a much more optimistic view of eschatology that kind of informs my vision of what we're called to do, which is we're to defeat death, we're to defeat sin, we're to defeat the Satan, and we do that as the body of Christ on earth, as his collective people. We are executing Jesus's game plan in history. And we do it in the worst, dumbest, we're the worst team. We're the most ignorant team. We're the most foolish team, but he's the greatest person. And so he's able to strategically execute victories through all of our stumbling and bumbling and fumbling down the field. And he gets a win.
Right.
And I think he cares about this earth. That's why, I mean, there's no other religion that talks about earth in this way, as not, the pagan religions, they were afraid of earth because they worshiped earth, because they had sacrificial violence tied into their conception of nature.
The material world was evil.
Yeah. And the Christian religion is the Christian story is the one in which we lose that love, hate kind of fear, worship dynamic of the earth. And we start to see this, wait a second, God created this. It is distinct from him, but his spirit indwells every aspect of this world. And he doesn't make this as, again, some kind of flat binary SAT, like you have a SAT question basically to get to his kingdom. And everything you're doing is like trying to get your algorithmic score to be a positive so that, oh, okay, your soul's light as a feather. You get to come into the kingdom of heaven. Thank you. Like that's not the point of what the story of Jesus is about. It's about the reason why he's healing so many people is that is what we are called to do in light of his resurrection. So he's doing a down payment. Everything he does is a down payment of what he's going to do in history through us. Right.
Well, it's like if you start thinking about like your point about how Christ, healed the blind, is Christ asking you to learn how to perform eye surgery and help people? Or is that something that you're supposed to help people with? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is like the whole point is your participation in Christ. That's the primary thing you focus on. And when it comes to technology, is it's easy to get carried away with focusing on the technology as opposed to focusing on repentance. The saints can heal the blind and they can do the same miracles as Christ because they participate in Christ through theosis. Whereas if you're talking about, healing the blind because you went to med school and learned how to perform eye surgery, that's not saying that eye surgery is not doing the work of Christ, but if you're not doing the repentance, then you're not, like that's the ultimate goal. I guess my point is to participate with Christ through repentance and theosis. And if that involves, doing eye surgery, then do that, be an eye surgeon. And I think you're right when you're talking about how, or you're right when you say Christians have this ability to be like, oh, all technology is evil. Doctors are all evil, therefore I'm not going to become a doctor. And like, no, I mean, if you're called to become a doctor, then become a doctor and do it properly and do it for the right reasons. And then if you keep that aim as the ultimate aim, then the rest of it is how you're helping people is irrelevant.
Yeah. I think a lot of this has to do with, like, I think that healing blindness is probably going to be least effective by going the official doctor route. So in some way, I agree with that because there's so much, one of the effects of being in a sinful world is that we're enslaved to tyranny in so many different ways. And that includes the paradigms that we believe to be the most esteemed and valuable paradigms to explore for healing or medicine or whatever. Like so much of our knowledge is skewed and mutated and retarded by our addiction to violence. We worship the state, we worship cronies that are connected to the state, and we reap the results, the fruit of that, which is further enslavement. So when I talk about creating anti-gravity or energy too cheap to meter, what I'm saying is that is the net result of when you are a Christ following people. But that doesn't, but see, here's what we do. We always say, well, we're not a Christ following people, so we should deserve it. No. If you follow Christ, you use your engineering skills, you use your whatever skills you have to serve your fellow human beings. And Jesus said, you will do greater things than me. Was he being facetious? Was he being cute? Was he being patronizing? I don't think so. I think he was being literal. And that's something that Christians are uncomfortable with because they want a Jesus that they can objectify and not a Jesus that they can become like. That they don't want a Jesus that they can walk on water with. They want a Jesus that walks on water while they sit in the boat and saying, "My God, you're the man, you're the man, you're the man." That's not Christianity. That's what a lot of people make Christianity to be, because it's easier, because it's really hard to walk on water. That's the dominion mandate, is to walk on water, to tame nature, because that's what God wants you to do. He wants you to serve your fellow human being. And if that means, whatever it is, I use the engineering thing as an example to just say, like, I believe we're living in an artificial dark age for a long time. And that if we had not relied on our worship of the government and worship of people and worship of our ideologies, things like, expert, the worship of the expert, or the worship of scientific Gnosticism, or the worship of liberalism or Americanism or democracy, all these big others are just the vestiges of false gods from previous times. And when we fixate on worshiping and, we trust in them, we get our goosebumps when the flag plays. When you're relying on that kind of worshipful mentality as a people, you will become enslaved to the dead ends of what those ideologies do, which is just strip you of your God-given potential. And so when I say create anti-gravity, I'm saying these are things that human beings could have had a long time ago, but we don't want to follow God. And so because we don't want to follow God, we follow man, and man enslaves us. And so when I say, hey, follow Christ, build anti-gravity, that feels offensive to a lot of conservative Christians, because they become used to just that kind of slave mentality. Like, hey, look, man, I'm on this plantation and my job is just to kind of, just play it right down the middle and keep my head down. And hey, you know what? There's interpretations of Christianity that say that's basically the point of being a Christian, is just, you just keep your head down and don't change the game. But at some point, I don't think that's what Christianity is about. I think Christianity is about destroying the powers that keep us in darkness. And that means that we need to have down payments on our authority as kings and priests in Christ, by healing the blind and curing these massive diseases and curing these chronic illnesses and curing pollution in the name of God. Because all the things that the powers have, see, here's the thing, that this is, again, the corruption of the good. All the things that the powers have are just cheap ripoffs of the Christian story and its aesthetic and its concern for the poor. And so the reason why the Schwabs of the world have, not him himself, but just the whole enterprise of what he represents, the reason why they have so much currency is they're the cheap ripoff of the real thing. And the cheap ripoff of the real thing still sometimes functionally has an aesthetic that is actually closer to Christ than the conservative reactionary Christians. Because the conservative reactionary Christians think that the entire purpose of becoming a Christian is just to escape this earth. What? That's not the story of Jesus. I'm sorry, it's not. It's not to escape this earth. Ted Kaczynski's dead wrong. Ted Kaczynski, this idea of nothing good can come of our effort, that's not what Jesus created his creation to do. They weren't to sit in the garden the rest of their life and just twiddle their thumbs. The Bible starts in a garden and ends in a city. So right. We're meant to make beauty. I don't know. I just think that so many people are, because it's a reaction to how nihilistic and sinful our culture is and people's participations in it or whatever, where it's like, man, the whole point of me being a Christian is so that I can just get away from all that evil. So if I can just sit in a pasture the rest of my life singing hymns, that's perfect Christianity.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there may be some people in the body that are called to do that, but that is certainly not the thrust of the text. You can't sit in perfect holiness and get from the garden to the city of God on earth. And you can't wait, which is what a lot of Christians do. It's like a theme park. I call it theme park eschatology, in which you're just going to kind of do your normal thing, be Christian, be holy, whatever, do your best you can to get rid of sin. And then the eschatology moment when Jesus comes back, That's when you get on the ride. And once you're on the ride, you don't have to move. You just sit, and that little machine moves around, and you get to see all the sights and wonders. And that's the big everything's fixed moment. But that's not really what it's going to be like. Actually, history is dynamic, and we're participating in this eschatological reality unfolding right in front of our eyes. That's why Paul talks about creation groaning. And it's not groaning because it's in pain, and so in that sense it's groaning in childbirth, right? And we are everything we do when we cure diabetes by removing seed oils. That's all we have to do. We don't have to go become a diabetes doctor. You just remove the seed oils out of the human population because they're a toxic thing. Type 2 diabetes is just you're gonna see it evaporate, just catastrophically plummet for big pharma. These are apocalyptic signs that unveil the reality of Christ, that God made this earth to be good. And we can use our minds in the name of Christ to serve our fellow human beings as illustrations of that goodness. And we shouldn't run from that just because Schwabs of the world have made a false imitation of that,
Right. So you're talking about the parable of the talents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good way to summarize it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. At the same time, you have the parable of the talents. So you're called to use the talents that have been given to you, but you're also, I guess the thing we can wrap it up on is anticipate being hated, anticipate martyrdom, anticipate having creation respond to you the same way that it responded to Christ. Christ, he healed the blind and fed the hungry, and yet they still killed him. So
right. No, that's true. They will do that, and it will probably come from the conservatives and the Christians first, because they'll think you're in league with the devil or the Antichrist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's possible.
But the point is that you do it for the sake of it being good in and of itself. That's the first step. And then the second step is that it may result in you being killed, or it may not. But you still stay holy regardless, whether you become wealthy or popular or loved or controversial or murdered. You do what you're supposed to do all the way through that experience. Duty is ours, results are God's.
Right.
It's our duty to do the best. We shouldn't be paying oligarchs for ridiculous, outdated, 120-year-old models of like energy and distribution. We should be able to have an abundance, right? We should be able to have poverty not be something that is such a scourge in the world's richest empire. People are enslaved to usurious debt. That's not from God. So why are Christians hiding? Why are Christians hiding? And how come when they only pop their head out, it's just to complain? They never want to do anything to stop it. Well, because we can't. Klaus Schwab will do it. No, he won't. He can't do it. He's a cheap ripoff of Jesus Christ. He's a generic value knockoff. He can't get the job done. He doesn't have the Holy Spirit with him. He doesn't have the intellect. He doesn't have the firepower of Christ. Intellectually, mentally, emotionally, nothing. He has none of it. He has none of it. He's made in the image of God, but his attempts to do these things through violence and coercion and manipulation is a cheap parlor trick ripoff of the real thing,
Right.
So we are the ones that have the real power, and we're over there saying, well, he's going to try to do something good, but he's going to do something evil instead. So we shouldn't do anything good. We should just hide. No, we shouldn't hide. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get out of the boat and walk on water. Yeah. I really appreciate your time. And this is an important topic because, like you said, there's a lot of delusions for it. And I think people, the reason why, the thing that sticks home to me, there's a gentleman I know who was very religious, and then he really went off the deep end when he got into remote viewing, talking to aliens. So when I saw what you're talking about, I said, man, that's the same thing you're talking about. He was doing a remote viewing, and those things started showing up in his house and stuff, and that's what he says, and this guy was a serious Christian who wrote extensively about the faith, and now he believes he's talking to aliens all the time. So, don't know what's going on.
And he's one of many. And we talked about this before we started recording, but there's a book called UFO of God by Chris Bledsoe, is a UFO contactee in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And he was pretty, he was a very active Christian. He was a Pentecostal, which I think might have something to do with the whole thing, but he was a very active Christian, and then he had these encounters. And I think the other part of the story that's really sad is that his congregation was like, this man is in contact with something demonic, shun him and get rid of him. And they basically pushed him out of the church. And so now all his kids are really interested in like esoteric occult traditions, and they're not, I guess, sure, the book says UFO of God, and the painting on the front is a Fox da Vinci painting of Christ, but the family is no longer participating in any kind of recognizable Christian tradition anymore. And I told you about this earlier too. The book talks about God and it talks about the Holy Spirit, but the word Jesus or the name Jesus never appears in the book once, which I thought was really bizarre. So like I said, you do see people who get mixed up in this phenomenon, and it leads them, from the Christian perspective, it leads them away from the church, which I've been trying to dance around without trying to go, into the whole, I'm trying to figure out how to discuss this with people who are not Christian, because it's not that, if you say, oh, if you talk to UFOs, you're going to leave Christ behind, and people are like, okay, well, I don't believe in Christ and I don't follow him anyway, then that means nothing to them. The same way I don't think it's helpful to call, you see people now on the internet, they're like, UFOs are demons. You're like, okay, well, a large portion of the population doesn't believe in Christianity or demons. So when you do that, they just completely discard you, and they use that as a sign to go explore the other interpretations of these things anyway, because they don't want your old outdated, method of calling things demonic that you don't understand. And that's the way they view it. And so, I've been trying to find a way to balance, calling these things out for what they are, but also not doing it in a way that's not helpful for others. But yeah, it does tend to lead people away from what we would consider to be truth and humanity's purpose, and towards something completely.
Right. You mentioned that you've had some encounters yourself. Can you speak on that or no?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, so I, as a kid, I've seen things in my bedroom. You know what I mean? Like I've woken up in the middle of the night and seen a being staring at me. I saw that in high school as a kid. And when I got out of college, it happened to me 2 or 3 times. And the first time I didn't know how to interpret it. I certainly didn't interpret it as a UFO being or whatever. I just heard that experience sleep paralysis, and they see things as they go from the dream state to consciousness and awake and reality or whatever. And so I just kind of assumed that that's what those things were. And then when I started getting into UFOs, I wondered, am I being visited by whatever the thing is? I've never really bought into the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But it made me wonder, like, am I somehow in contact, unwanted contact? Because I'm not the type of person who wants things to show up in my room in the middle of the night. And I read a lot of the UFO contactee, abductee literature, and it scared the hell out of me. And that's just kind of the way I viewed it. All of it was frightening to me. And I don't know how anyone read that stuff and took away, like, man, I hope little beings show up in my room and whisk me away and tell me to save the environment when they're done probing me and doing, weird medical experiments on me. That none of that ever made sense.
That sounds like Epstein Island for real there. I mean, what you just said. So
right. And so I was reading the book I was telling you about earlier by Daniel O'Connor, Only Man Bears His Image. And he has this chart in his book, and it's not even his data. It's a chart that MIT put together. There's a direct relationship between the UFO abductee experience and people who have survived satanic ritual abductions. Yeah. Like there's a complete overlap of similarities of what people experience, and they might not interpret them the same way, but think about someone who's put on a craft and they're laid out on this barren medical table with the white cloth, and like, how is that any different than an altar? And there's just all of these really, really strange overlaps. And that's something that MIT put together. It wasn't even, it's not like you have concerned Christians who are trying to prove to the world that they're demonic, that this is what's going on. This is, just kind of generic scientists discussing this.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Father Malachi Martin. He went to, apparently he was called out to Fort Bragg one time he was a famous exorcist who wrote the book Hostage to the Devil to do an exorcism on a military member of the United States government, brought him out allegedly, and they're supposed to make a movie about it or something. But Fort Bragg, I think, is where they did some of that remote viewing and some of those clandestine
operations, Stargate or whatever. Yeah. It's possible. And you know, the movie The Exorcist is based on a case that the Catholic Church dealt with, and the kid who it's actually based on grew up to work for NASA. It was like a rocket scientist.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't know that.
Well, I appreciate your time. Check out unmaskthephenomenon.substack.com. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Very good.